It's okay.
Well, that's good. Okay. Okay. So, I used to get to see a lot of your faces every week because you'd make that trip all the way to Salt Lake and do the Doris Hanson show and then my show. And I don't get to see so many of you anymore, but I sure want to thank you for all the trips you made for 7 years or so. Scott and Jim come down about twice a month, and we get to see them. And so, but I really appreciate them and appreciate all the support that Main Street Church has given to me and to Doris. And she was here last week, I understand, and hope that went well. One of the things that's inevitable about a presentation, especially with my background, 65 years in the church, the Mormon church, it's inevitable that there'll be contrasts. And so I want to avoid offending people, but I'm going to say things I'm trying to be factual, and you can bring into it your experience and your background and where you're at, and maybe you can just kind of, without me saying some things, maybe you can interpolate and kind of determine what it is there that is interesting as far as the contrast is concerned. One thing that I asked Jim initially, what should I talk about? And he said, well, tell him about your ministry and what you're doing. And I started looking at that possibility, and I thought, well, I don't know if I can stand up here for 40 minutes and just pat myself on the back and say how wonderful I am. But I do appreciate the responses that we've had, and there's actually a couple of people here today that our Ex-Mormon Files has influenced, and I just love those stories and love that influence. I did have a couple that I wanted to read to you. It says, thanks so much for your tenacity and determination to continue your broadcasts. I love the personal stories and the excitement your guests show when they get to describe their discovery of who Christ is. And that's the core of it, isn't it? And then another one said, praise the Lord, what an awesome God. The Lord has used your videos to help and encourage me to get back on the right track biblically. So that was sounds like from a Christian, but at least a perspective. And I've had some Mormons mention to me, some that have left the church, that they've felt comforted, I guess is the best word, knowing that their journey wasn't in vain and that they actually feel better about the journey they made. So I didn't even expect any of that when I first was challenged with my faith. But anyway, so we're going to get started here. One of the things I find interesting, for my whole 65 years, I always saw the name of my church and visitors welcome. That's all I ever saw on the outside of a church. However, in the Christian church, we have a little more humor. Don't let worries kill you, let the church help. And we love hurting people. Anyway, we're going to talk a little bit about temples. This is the one you have here, Brigham City. How many of you were able to get through the open house and saw the temple? Okay. And besides this one, most of you been through a Mormon temple? Okay. Too many times? Anyway, this is the temple, of course, in Salt Lake. This is where Carla and I were married, 1969, so 47 years ago. And that's us coming out of I think it was the East Gate or the North Gate at that time. They've changed everything there at the temple since 69, but there's me and my dear wife, Carla. And this is what came out during L. Tom Perry's funeral recently. The entire theology of our restored gospel centers on families and on the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. That's kind of an interesting perspective. My mind's changed a little bit since then. A few years ago, that would have meant a lot to me. Anyway, we're going to compare the Jewish temples to the LDS temples. There were actually 4, and how appropriate that we had communion today and remembered the blood and the sacrifice, as Scott mentioned, that they put the blood on the posts of the their doors and during what ended up becoming Passover. But they first had what they called a tabernacle. And this was carried during the 40 years Exodus, and it was used from about 1500 BC. All these dates are, if you look up a date, you're going to, or a place, you're going to get 3 or 4 different ideas of when these things occurred. But anyway, it's used basically from 1500 to about 1057 when Solomon built his first temple, and it's called the first temple, and it was in operation from about 1057 to 587 BC, sorry about that, misprint, because in BC, that's when the Babylonians came in and destroyed the temple and took Israel over to Babylon. And they were released 70 years later. They were 70 years in exile. And so the second temple was built in about 513 BC, and it's called Herod's temple because in about 20 BC, Herod began a remodel that actually went up until into the 60s. Maybe some speculated about 62 to 64. And then, of course, a few years later, the Romans destroyed it in 70 AD. Then yet to be built is a third temple that's described in Ezekiel. It's called Ezekiel's temple. And I guess there's different ways of looking at this. Some people feel that this third temple will be destroyed during this end times, and that there will yet be a fourth temple built, which will be one that will last through the millennium. Okay, so here's kind of a little replica of the tabernacle, and it was portable, of course. It was one that they were to be mobile. They did offer sacrifices. They continued the sacrifices. There was the replica of the temple, I guess, there, the tabernacle. There was a Holy of Holies in there, and this is where they had the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the Ark of the Covenant included the 2 stone tablets, the 10 Commandments, a golden urn that had some manna in it, and Aaron's rod, the rod, I guess, that he turned into a serpent. And I always heard that Joseph's bones were in the Ark of the Covenant. Is that something that anyone else knows? I've only been doing this for a few years yet, so you guys are more well-read than I am. But is it? Because I always heard that Joseph's bones would return back to Jerusalem, and I didn't know if they got put in the Ark of the Covenant or not. Anyway, this is a artist rendering of the Ark of the Covenant. A lot of different views of it, but it is described in the Bible. And across where these angels, I guess, are sitting, or seraphims, or whatever they are, is the mercy seat. That's called the mercy seat up on top, and that's where blood is sprinkled. In Exodus 26, it says, "Make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet, and fine twined linen of cunning work, and the veil shall divide you between the holy place and the most holy place." The most holy place is synonymous with the Holy of Holies. "Thou shalt set a table without the veil, and the candlestick over against the table. Bring Aaron and his sons," and this is their calling now. This is what's kind of an interesting contrast. "Bring Aaron and his sons, wash them with water, put upon Aaron the holy garments, anoint him, that he may minister unto me in the priest's office, for their anointing shall be an everlasting priesthood. Appoint the Levites over the tabernacle. They shall bear the tabernacle, they shall take it down, the Levites shall set it up, and the Levites shall keep charge of the tabernacle." And you all know that the Levites weren't given a geographical inheritance in Canaan or in Palestine or whatever, the area of Jerusalem and all that. The other tribes were, but the Levites were to live off as priests. And that's an interesting contrast with what I previously believed, actually. After the tabernacle, and then this is an artist rendering, I guess, of Solomon's temple. We'll get a little bit more into Solomon's temple. This is one view of it, or someone's perspective of it. Here's another one, and here's a third one. Interesting, this is called the brass altar on the right, and that's where they did the burnt offerings and sacrificed animals. This is the one on the left is called the molten sea, or the brass sea, It's supposed to represent the Red Sea, but this is where the priests would use to wash themselves, and it's on the back of 12 oxen. You'll notice that it's outside the temple, which is another interesting contrast. And this is what's called the court of the priests. So no one was allowed in here but the priests. There were no women in here at all. In fact, it was just the Levite priests. And here's another rendering that could actually be either Herod's temple or Solomon's temple. And the areas to the right and to the left are called the court of the Gentiles. And then again, inside the gate, I think that might be called the Golden Gate, I'm not sure, but between there and that wall back there is the court of the women, court of Israel, and it's really where the activity of the Jews. You had to be a Jew to be in there, or an Israelite to be in there, and this is where they think, or pretty sure, where Jesus would have been sitting by the treasury, or across from the treasury when the widow came in and put her mites and that would have been in this area here. Anyway, if you can imagine, and I read again Numbers, but during Passover and Yom Kippur there were 3 times that the Jews were, I keep saying Jews, I guess that's what the best word for it, all the people would come from around the world, would come to Jerusalem. They estimated that there was maybe 600,000 people in Jerusalem, and it would grow to almost 3 million people during these feasts. So you can imagine how these areas would fill up, and I don't know if they put tents out there or how they existed with that many people. And the other thing they talked about is that there was some point there. They estimated some 200, I think Josephus says this, 256,000 sheep that were sacrificed. It's a lot of sacrifice. Just a whole different kind of culture. So here we have again, or to see it in a different way, these 7 steps and 8 steps. There's a whole story there about the Psalms 120 to 134. Each of these steps represent one of those psalms. And then again, the brazen or brass altar, the molten sea, and then the opening of the temple, and we'll look at this again, but the tables of showbread, the altar of incense, and then the veil of the temple, and then the Holy of Holies and the Ark of the Covenant. These other square things there were also wash basins for the priests. You can imagine 256,000 sheep. That's a lot of priests going around and taking care of it. Even if it was 20 or 30,000, it would be a lot of animals and a lot of washing. So here is another depiction of the different elements of it. I think in my trouble, this is when, if you can see the gold that's in the interior there, this is what First Chronicles says. In my trouble, I, David, have prepared for the house of the Lord 100,000 talents of gold, and 1,000,000 talents of silver, and of brass and iron without weight. And it's estimated that a weight of a talent is somewhere between 57 and 75. Nobody would be really specific. But at 60 pounds, we're talking about 6 million pounds of gold. And here, these days, I don't know what gold's running, but it's based on ounces. And it's like $1,000, $1,200, $1,600 an ounce. And so 6 million pounds of gold. You can see why these temples were destroyed. They weren't just ransacked, they weren't just taken over. They were actually pillaged and taken down. Silver is about half weight, so about 30 million pounds of silver, 153,000 laborers, and it took 7 years to build it. Kind of an interesting thing is that they named the posts, these big poles, They named them one Jachin, and I looked him up, and all it said was there was a son of Simeon that was named Jachin. Boaz, you'll recognize that name with Ruth. He was the father of Obed, who was the father of Jesse, who was the father of David. So that one, and David was the father of Solomon. So that one made sense. And I kept wondering if maybe Bathsheba or somebody's uncle was named Jachin. That was just a speculation on my part that somebody in the family was named Jachin, and that was how he got a post named after him. Josephus said that the front was all polished stone, insomuch that its fineness to such as had not seen it was incredible, and to such as had seen it was greatly amazing. Thus was the first enclosure of the temple. And he continued, in the midst of which, and not far from it, was the second to be gone up by a few steps. This was encompassed by a stone wall for a partition, with an inscription that forbade any foreigner to go in under pain of death. So, and lastly, but the temple further inward in that gate was not allowed to the women. But still more inward was a third court of the temple, wherein it was not lawful for any but the priests alone to enter. The temple itself was within this, and before that temple was the altar, upon which we offer our sacrifices and burnt offerings to God. Into none of these three did King Herod enter, for he was forbidden, because he was not a priest. So another view, you see the candlesticks, the menorahs, I guess they're called. There's 7 candles on each. The showbread. The showbread, I guess, they were supposed to have 12 loaves of bread sitting on there. There was some speculation whether they were leavened or unleavened, but the priests were to replenish them or change them out every Sabbath, and they were able to take those home and eat them, I guess. And then more steps, as you see. I think we've got, yeah. So steps into the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and also the veil, as you've probably heard this, and there is speculation, I guess, about some of this, but they figured that the veil was 4 inches thick, and that horses pulling on either side of it couldn't tear it apart. And of course that becomes significant later in the Bible. But it was 60 feet tall and 30 feet wide, the veil, and 4 inches thick. Have you ever moved the curtain on a stage? One of those big heavy curtains? Oh my goodness, they're just, ooh. And this must have been amazing. Another illustration, I threw these in, and anyway, the court of the priests on the inside, women's court. Oh, there's the Golden Gate. It's not where I was saying it was. Court of the Gentiles on the sides. I'm not sure where I wanted to bring this up, but somewhere in the stories, of course, we know Jesus cleared the temple. And when he cleared the temple, let me just see where I'm at. Okay. When he cleared the temple, I guess I could never find anybody specifically saying it. It seems like the money changers would have been people from the outside, probably Gentiles, who brought different foreign currency to trade for local currency, or however they did that, and sell animals so that they could bring the animals into the court, the women's court. Even though it was called women's court, it was also called Court of Israel. That men and women could go into this first court. And there at that little, before they got to the court of the priests, that's where they would hand over the animal to be sacrificed. So where Jesus actually cleansed the temple is not really clear, whether it was in the court of the Gentiles or whether they actually spilled into the court of Israel, and that's where they were changing money. But in any case, he did that. And does anybody have other insights to that? But okay. Maybe I'll say it while I'm thinking about it. When we used to say Jesus went to the temple, that had a whole different connotation when I was a Latter-day Saint. I assumed he went into the temple. I guess I might have assumed he did baptism. He wouldn't have done baptisms for the dead, but he went to the temple. I mean, that's, if you say that, and that's what my dear friends hear all the time, that Jesus went into the temple. Well, he didn't actually go into the temple. He didn't even get to be, he wasn't even a tribe of Levi. He didn't even hold the priesthood. He couldn't even go into the court of priests. He could only go into the women's court. A totally different perspective when you think about really what the purpose of temples was. And it's just interesting that I wonder, again, I didn't pick up this in my readings, but just if these priests were really understanding that this was going to be a suffering Messiah that was going to come and shed his blood, did they really understand and appreciate what they were doing when they took this little innocent lamb who had no offensive or defensive weapons? They just took this pure, innocent, clean, unblemished animal and shed the blood of that animal, and did they realize they were portraying the sacrifice of Jesus? Again, but it's a wonderful thing for us to look back and consider. Anyway, this is just a simplified look at the temple. So there we have the Jewish temples. Now we come to the Mormon temples. And the first one that was built was back in 1832, 33, dedicated in 1836. This is the Kirtland Temple. It's still standing. I guess the Reorganized Church owns it, or maybe the LDS Church does. I'm not sure. I think they are LDS. Anyway, it's still standing. But this is an older picture, and I don't know when it was. It wasn't dated. And I don't know if you can read. I threw this in because it was so humorous. Can you see that there's a little writing on that trailer? It says Picture, Picture, Saloon. I thought of all the people or all the pictures that could be taken of the Kirtland Temple, that was an interesting one. Picture Saloon. Anyway, that was the Kirtland Temple, and there's the interior of the Kirtland Temple. I think on one side is the Melchizedek priesthood, and on the other side over here would have been the Aaronic priesthood. I'm not sure east or west, and then you can see the gallery. And in some ways, it was not much more than just a meeting house. But in the Doctrine and Covenants 88, it says, establish a house, even a house of prayer, a house of fasting, a house of faith, of learning, glory, a house of order, a house of God. That was in 1832. In 1833, God supposedly said, let the lower part be dedicated for your sacrament offering, preaching, fasting, praying, and the offering of your most holy desires, and let the higher part of the inner court be dedicated unto me for the school of mine apostles. There's a picture of the Nauvoo Temple. Again, I'm not sure the date. The church has since, this was pretty much destroyed, I guess, over the years after the pioneers came to Utah, and it's been rebuilt, and they now have a temple in Nauvoo, one of their 150 temples. The Nauvoo Temple began in 1841. The basement and font was completed in November of 1841, and in the Doctrine and Covenants 124, now he says about Nauvoo, build a house to my name for the Most High to dwell therein. For a baptismal font there is not upon the earth, that they, my saints, may be baptized for those who are dead. But I command you to build a house unto me, a house in the land of promise, that those ordinances might be revealed which had been hid from before the world was, that your anointings, your washings, your baptism for the dead, your solemn assemblies, your memorials for your sacrifices by the sons of Levi, let this house be built unto my name, that I may reveal mine ordinances therein unto my people. And Bruce R. McConkie said, the ordinances performed in the temple were given in modern times to the prophet Joseph Smith by revelation, many things connected with them being translated by the prophet from the papyrus on which the book of Abraham was recorded. Now, the interesting thing is this was written in 1965, before the papyrus was returned to the church, so Bruce R. McConkie didn't have access to this information that the book of Abraham may not have actually discussed, or the papyrus may not have actually discussed the ordinances in the temple, as they definitely don't. Elder Whitsoe said many of the, now this is an interesting thing, and I want to draw this contrast more specifically, but many of the saints, Hiram, Brigham, Heber C. Kimball, Newell Whitney, and John Bennett were Masons. And Joseph joined the Masons in March 15 of 1842. In the history of the church, Joseph Smith writes, "In the evening I received the first degree in Freemasonry in the Nauvoo Lodge, and the next day I was with the Masonic Lodge and rose to the sublime degree." That's a 33-degree Mason. And let me see where I'm at. Okay. The interesting contrast here is that there was nothing of work for the dead, no marriages for time and all eternity, no tokens, no symbols, no covenants, nothing in the Kirtland Temple. But after Joseph joined the Masons, then all of a sudden Nauvoo had all kinds of work for the dead and signs and tokens and covenants. And it's, well, draw your own conclusions there. Your endowment is to receive, this is from Brigham Young, your endowment is to receive all those ordinances in the house of the Lord which are necessary for you after you've departed this life to enable you to walk back to the presence of the Father, passing the angels who stand as sentinels, being enabled to give them the key words, the signs and tokens pertaining to the holy priesthood. Something that happened in 1990, the church changed its ordinances. They had changed it a number of times over the years, but there was a dramatic change in 1990, and of course I lived through that. I'd gone through the temple before 1990, obviously, so I kept kind of joking in my Mormon head, well, they're just going to have to tell the angels that we pass by that, okay, well, Earl went through the temple before 1990, so this is what he's going to say. And then the people that went after 1990, these are the things they have to say. They're going to have to keep track of kind of when you went through the temple because things got changed. I know it's kind of silly, but I did think that as a good Latter-day Saint. I didn't dismiss it. I figured God could work it out anyway. President Kimball said, "Only through celestial marriage can one find the straight way, the narrow path. Eternal life cannot be had in any other way." The Lord was very specific and very definite in the matter of marriage. You see the contrast between Jewish temple and a Mormon temple. This is the interior of the Salt Lake Temple. It's an older picture. It's still very ornate, and most of it probably updated the furniture, but you can see an altar back there. I always thought that those closed doors in the middle were the Holy of Holies, and I don't know if that's true or not. It probably isn't, but that was when I used to go into the celestial room. I thought, well, that's and here's another altar. And I wondered, when you went through the temple, did they let you go into the altar rooms? Did you get to see the mirrors and the reflection, the eternal reflection kind of thing? And very interesting, inside the temple, usually in the basement, they have a baptismal font that's placed on the 12 oxen representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And this is where the baptisms for the dead occur. And Bruce R. McConkie said, "In Solomon's temple, a large molten sea of brass was placed on the backs of 12 brazen oxen, or brass. This brazen sea was used for performing baptisms for the living." Now see, what did I explain earlier is that this was in the court of the priests. Only the Levite men, priests, could be there. So unless they baptized themselves all the time, there would be no baptisms at all for the living. And I don't know how Bruce R. McConkie came up with that. There were no baptisms for the dead until after the resurrection of Christ. It must be remembered that all direct and plain references to baptism have been deleted from the Old Testament. So they've taken the plain and precious things out of the Bible, which we now know from the Dead Sea Scrolls and everything else we know is that they didn't take the references to baptism out. In describing the molten sea, the Old Testament record, this is still Bruce R. McConkie, says, "The sea was for the priests to wash in." Now that's what, if you read that, that's what it says. This is tantamount to saying that the priest performed baptisms in it. I mean, I would read that and believe it all the way through. I just, it's an apostle telling me that the priest performed baptisms at the temple. That's what I would believe. Yes?
If you did a baptism in molten brass, you would die.
Well, it was water. I mean, it was called molten sea, but it was water. I mean, it wasn't hot. No. But it was supposed to represent the Red Sea and the dividing of the Red Sea. That's why the water was there. But it was also functional. I figure there was a faucet there that the priests used to wash their hands and clean up after the sacrifices and so on. But certainly no baptisms. No. So, remember this from Princess Bride? Yeah. You keep using that word, I do not think it means what you think it means. Well, it's interesting, well, again, kind of relating back to my comment about Jesus going to the temple. A Mormon would normally put so much into that as opposed to what really seems to be what the Bible's telling us. And another cute one I found, I thought, she asked for sour cream on the side. I mean, if you take things just as they are, it's, yeah. So the differences between the Jewish and LDS temples. The Jewish temple, there were animal sacrifices, burnt and blood offerings for both the individual, for all of Israel. There was only one temple. This kind of shocked me when I kind of got into this Christian movement here in a moment, to realize that there really was only one temple ever. Women were not allowed in the temple, so they obviously didn't perform marriages unless it was some miraculous way. Only those of the Levitical line were allowed to participate in the temple. And this one, I don't know whether it was just over my head when I was LDS, if anybody ever talked about it, but we never understood the concept of one high priest going into the temple, into the Holy of Holies, and performing that annual sacrifice on the Day of Atonement. It just, I must have missed it, but I never understood that concept. And I did read a little bit about the rope on his foot, in case he died. It's kind of a rumor, or it's not actually in the Bible anywhere, so I don't know. But it's kind of a fun idea. If he has a heart attack, you can pull him out. Anyway, the Mormon temples, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that there was supposed to be a restoration. And what L. Tom Perry said, the whole theology of the restored gospel is the eternal family. And we just don't see that in the Jewish temple. And really a restoration, there was no animal sacrifice now, or there's no animal sacrifice now. There were no baptisms for the dead in the old temples, but there is in the current one, or Mormon temples. Initiatory work, the first time you go through for yourself, and thereafter you go through for those that have passed away, deceased. The men receive the Aaronic or Levitical and Melchizedek priesthood. And when someone says, I'm going to the temple, or I've just been to the temple, they usually mean they've gone through for a personal endowment. And then, of course, we have a marriage for time and all eternity, and we go through a veil to the celestial room. And as you know, let's see where I'm at here. Yeah, as we know in Luke and Matthew, it tells us, and the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom, and the earth did quake, and the rocks rent. So the veil, this thick veil, huge veil, was ripped apart, and Jesus said, it is finished. And he sat down. Howbeit the Most High dwelleth not in temples made with hands, as saith the prophet. Heaven is my throne, the earth is my footstool. What house will you build me, saith the Lord, or what is the place of my rest? God that made the world and all things therein, seeing that he is Lord of heaven and earth, dwelleth not in temples made with hands. And I kind of paraphrase this from Hebrews. Boy, don't you just love Hebrews? It's so neat. 9, 10, and 13. Christ being a high priest, a more perfect tabernacle, not by blood of goats, but by his own blood, he entered into the holy place after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God, that Jesus might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered without the gate. Let us offer the sacrifice of praise to God. And this is the great promise that we have now. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? For ye are the temple of the living God, as God hath said, I will dwell in them and walk in them, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people.
Well, one question is coming
Yeah.
to my mind. When Jesus washed the feet of disciples, who,
Yeah.
who cried first?
Who cried first? You mean Peter?
Now, when Jesus washed
He washed their
of the
feet.
disciples,
Yeah.
Jesus wept along with
Oh,
disciples,
Jesus wept. Yeah. Serving them.
serving them.
Yeah. There was another hand back there. Sorry.
They also have temple divorces, correct?
Temple divorces? Yeah, I'm not really up on that current thinking there, but in the past you had to get permission from, if you were divorcing and you wanted to remarry, you were to get a temple divorce.
Well, it said marriage for time of eternity, so do they not understand what eternity means?
Well, it's flexible, I guess. If you, it is kind of what's kind of funny, and I don't know where we're at with time. I'm sorry, but one of the things, and we're almost done, by the way. But one of the things that was kind of funny is I had an aunt. Well, my grandpa was married and divorced from my grandma on the Erskine side, and my grandpa lived with his sister. And the sister, of course, hated the sister-in-law that was divorced, but she was so afraid that once she died, that someone would come along and marry these two people back together again. It bothered her tremendously, and she, of course, was a good, faithful Mormon, or Latter-day Saint, and she was so concerned. And I just think it's funny how after people have been dead for 100 years, or maybe even less now, I don't know, we go in and just do their work for them and make them Mormons and baptize them and marry them to whoever we want to marry them to. And we just figure the Lord's going to work it all out in the end or something. I don't know. Okay, again, I think that was it. Okay, so one last scripture I wanted to finish with, and I just can't tell you how wonderful this perspective of the real gospel has been in my life, to realize what really is the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and how the Bible, from the very beginning, talking about altars and sacrifice and the shedding of blood, even Adam and Eve being given coats of skin, knowing, of course, that you had to shed blood to give them animal skin, all looking forward to that sacrifice of Jesus. And just never had that perspective before. But I'd like to read Jeremiah 31 through 33. Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah, not according to the covenant that I made with their fathers in the day that I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, which my covenant they broke, although I was a husband unto them, saith the Lord. But this shall be the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel. After those days, saith the Lord, I will put my law in their inward parts, write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people. And I'm just so grateful to have Jesus in my life and in my heart, I hope, and that he's paid for my sins and did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I never understood that. I was trying to earn my way to heaven and put him in my debt so that he owed me. And what a strange concept that is. So thank you for your attention, and I say this in Jesus' name.